to everyone from California Department of Education and from the Special Education Division. So I like to know who's in the room, and there are only 7 of us, but I like to just show different little games that are out there for people to use. So this is called Poll Everywhere, and everyone, even our virtual audience, can take advantage of this. You will need some kind of electronic device, your phone, your computer. Your phone is probably the easiest, because you're just going to send a text message. So open up your text app, whatever it is that you use to send text messages with, and the person that you're sending the message to is this 22333 number. So after you open it up, and there's the line that says 2, the person you're sending it to is 22333. And then you have to send that person a message. The message you're sending them is my name, Tamara Osborn, 845, capital letters. It doesn't matter, it's not cap sensitive. And once you do that, you should get a message saying you are now inside of this, you're in tomorrow's session. And now you just respond to the question. So the question is, what's your current role? You okay? Yep. All right. You ladies all right? Got in just fine? Okay. So I think we have infant specialists, we have inclusion, we have some para specialists. Some coordinators, speech pathologists, paraeducators. All right. Who's the infant teacher or infant provider? Oh, don't hide now. It's only 7 of us. Can't hide. That's true. Thank you. That's right. They could be virtual. Oh, and they're still coming in. That's awesome. Great, so it looks like statewide, co-teachers, wonderful. Training and technical assistance, great. Looks like we have a wide range, that's good to know. Thank you so very, very much. We're gonna go back to our presentation here. Okay. So being that I am with the Desired Results Project, this slide may look very familiar to many of you if you've done anything with the California Department of Education. Usually all of our presentations start with a slide about the early learning and development system because it ties in all of the comprehensive pieces that are available for educators, starting with, of course, the foundations. Everyone knows what those are, right? The research backing. And then, of course, those frameworks that are available. So when I talk about the resources that are there for you, going to your foundations, going to your framework, and then, of course, program guidelines that just support all programs that are available through the California Department of Education, the Special Education Division. So inclusion works books, preschool English learner guides, the preschool program guidelines, all of those publications free to download from the CDE website. And inside of the green folder that everyone has, or the handouts that were sent to you virtually, there is also the handout for ordering any of those publications. So that's inside of your folder if you wanted to order those and have your own hand or your own book in your hand to have. Today, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the pieces specifically in the Desired Results System, and that's the DRDP. Yay! I love it. Thank you. We don't usually get that. So, so inside your folder, one of the first handouts looks like this, and it talks about an overview of the DRDP. So I like to talk and have people talk back to me. How many views of the DRDP are there? It's not a trick question. 3. There's the comprehensive view, which has 56 measures. And then there's a fundamental view that has 43. And I know in special education programs, they use the fundamental version. And then there's also the infant toddler view, which is available for infant toddler teachers. So 3 different views, depending on your agency, depending on the age level you work with, is which view you're going to use inside of your program. So the handout you have talks about each of those views, what the differences are. And it even gives on the very last page the policy memo from Special Education Division saying that in special education programs, they are using the fundamental view of the assessment. So if anyone asks, why are we not doing this and why are you doing that? There's always a memo or management bulletin that comes out explaining who's using what and when. So this is just a nice 3 chart of the handout that you have talking about the difference between infant toddler, your comprehensive, and your fundamental. One of the key between these 2, because these are the 2 used in preschool, are the amount of conditional measures. And in a special education program, conditional measures really doesn't apply because all of the measures inside of that fundamental view must be completed if that preschool age child has an IEP. I see people taking notes. And if I go too fast or you have a question, feel free to ask. All right. So inside of the DRDP itself, it will lay out how all of the measures are inside of each of the domains. And one of the nice tips and or tricks that I like to give to teachers is to actually download this page. It's inside of their DRDP and blow it up as big as you can, like make a huge copy of it. Cut out those specific domains and post them in those areas of your classroom. That way, it's not out of sight, out of mind. It's like, oh, over in this area, I can observe for these kinds of skills. I can observe for these kind of behaviors. So it's really embedding that practice of observation throughout your classroom. And then, of course, this is, again, the measures at a glance just in the fundamental view. This specific handout can be found on the Desired Results website. And what it does is highlight what those conditional measures are so that in a general ed preschool program, they know that these are the measures they might not have to rate depending on that preschool age child. So when you tell teachers that there are 13 measures they might not have to rate, they get kind of excited. They're like, what? Tell me more about that. So that's it's very helpful to be able to visually show what those measures are. So
those are mine. Yeah.
I looked at it like, that's not.
No. So it's a good time, I think, to touch base on, in designing the DRDP 2015, for those of you that have been doing this for a while and serving children who are receiving special education services, you know that there wasn't always one instrument that was used for all kids in the state. Prior to that, we had the DR Access. So prior to fall of 2015, we had the DR Access that was required for children with disabilities. And then we had other versions of the DRDP, and I'm going to say them, the DRDR, we had the 2010, we had other versions that were used on the gen ed side. So several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, we got together and CDE said we want to work our 2 divisions together to create one instrument. And so we did, and knowing that there were a lot of benefits for the field in doing that. So I just wanted to quickly highlight what we see as the benefits at each level. So the first would be, what are the benefits of having a single instrument and a single and shared reports for teachers? And so the goal is that if you're serving a child in an inclusive setting, that you can speak the same language, you're assessing the same skills. When you're writing goals and plans, you can do that collaboratively, and we really want you to be doing that collaboratively. So being on a single instrument, it really helps you do that. But you'll be speaking the same language. We want you to be monitoring the progress of the child across these same measures together. That's why a number of our reports are the same, so that you can be doing that and you can be monitoring both how the child is doing now, but how they're progressing over time. And then you can also be providing information to the parent that is similar because it's coming from the same assessment tool. So whether you're doing that collaboratively, communicating with families, or doing it individually, you'll be speaking the same language. And this is a no-go? No. Oh, yes, it did, didn't it? Right? Okay. So then what are the benefits for administrators? In much the same way as the benefits for teachers, administrators across systems can be speaking the same language. They can be planning around the same domains, around the same measures, around the same skills. They can consider curricular changes, whether it be special education specific areas or general education specific areas. They can consider those curricular changes using the same language and using the same sort of activities by having this single instrument to guide them. And then the same goes for providing information to families about how the child is developing across this instrument, and it's the same for all kids. Lastly, our goal on both sides is that families are able to take a look at this assessment, and there's only one that they're looking at. I recognize that the timing of assessments might be a little bit different, especially in Head Start, as compared to, say, the assessment requirements in special education. They might not always match up, but at least when not only you're collaborating, but when you're communicating to families, you're still communicating about the same instrument on the same domains and the same measures, and so there's less confusion about that. And our goal is that you can keep them focused on making developmental progress on the same instrument in the same way, and you're not speaking a different language. So now we wanted to take a minute to each tell you, so Tamara already said this off the top, but there are a couple of ways that you can get reports. If you are a general education teacher, there's one way, and she's going to talk about that way. If you're a special education teacher, there's another way to get those reports. So we're going to give you a quick overview of those two systems.
So there's DRDP Tech. How many of you have heard of DRDP Tech? So DRDP Tech is where general ed programs enter the ratings for all of the children inside of their program. It's been required of state-funded programs since 2015, the fall of 2015. So all ratings must go into Tech. After those ratings are in there, of course, programs then are to use that data to inform classroom planning. Well, Tech is also free to Head Start, Tribal Head Start, K through 12, and CSU programs. So pretty much programs serving preschools throughout the state of California. As long as you're receiving some kind of state funding, you can receive access to this for free. So DRDP Tech gives all kinds of helpful information to teachers, programs to help make programmatic changes, also to families so that families can see where their children are strong and where their children may need some more support. So those reports can then be printed as soon as teachers are done completing the assessment. There's no wait or lag time. As soon as they're done, those reports are available. Right now inside of DRDP Tech, there are 3 different types of reports that are available for children. So for an individual child, a teacher can pull a ratings report that just shows where each measure is rated. Now, while that may seem like the best thing for a teacher to pull, we highly, highly recommend and highly suggest that teachers pull child reports, because the child reports give them more information, more helpful information about the child's overall development, and then they can use that information in order to inform planning. And then the third type of report that's available for individual children is called Progress This Year. And it will show where a child was in one rating period in a certain domain, and then where they are currently in that very same domain. So showing how the child has progressed within that year. Have you guys seen these reports? Yes. So,
I'm so sorry.
go for it. No.
Just to get an idea, actually, how many of you are required to put your data into tech? Okay, and how many of you are on the special education side and putting your data somewhere else? Okay.
How many of you are doing both?
Okay, all right, that's helpful.
Because that is the requirement, is that data has to go into two different places if that child is being dually served. So also inside of DRDP Tech, there are three different types of group reports available. One of them being the group report that looks very similar to the child report. It's going to give you that overall domain rating for that group of children, breaking it down how many children at different developmental levels for this particular domain. Again, helping teachers to either pinpoint where a large group of their children may need more support or where smaller groups are, so that they can pull them aside and give them a different kind of support or a different kind of activity to help them with their learning and development. There's also progress over time, progress over time for that same group of children or for a group of children. So comparing where they were in one rating period and comparing where they may be in another. There's a new report called the Class Detail Report, which is very helpful for teachers who are looking to individualize and meet the needs of that specific child in the group. So it will show all of the measures, and it will show which child is rated at which level for each of those measures. So it gives the names, it kind of groups the children for them. So here, where you have just numbers, you have no idea who those 13 friends are. In the class detail report, it will say, those 13 friends are these guys. These 4 are these guys. And we're going to take a deeper look at some of those reports later on. The great thing about the reports, because we know that we give out these beautiful rainbow-colored lollipop reports and give them all these nice, beautiful names, but if the teacher doesn't know how to analyze and use that data, it's not very useful. So there are guidance documents available on the Desired Results website right now. You can go there and download them. They're also inside of the tech program. So at desiredresults.us and at draccess.org, there are 2 different guidance documents available. One of them is all about the group report. What does this mean? What are these features? The other is the child report guidance document, again, giving teachers a deeper look into how am I supposed to use this information. And Elizabeth's going to go into greater detail about how to analyze those reports in just a moment. Do you all have those? Have you seen those guidance documents, or is that something new? That's something new? So I will also say on this website, we provide webinars about how to read these reports. We provide webinars on how to use the data to plan. Has anyone joined any of those webinars? Yes, okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth so she can talk about the
DR Access reports. So for those of you that are on the special education side, I'm going to speak to you directly for 1 minute. So on the SELPA side, when you turn in your DRDP records, some of you may be turning that into an MIS system like SACE or Cyrus Systems, these other sort of third-party vendors. We have worked really closely with several of those vendors to create an import-export process, so there's no more data entry. So if you're in SACE, for example, you can export all your records after you've entered them there and then upload them to our system so that you can produce reports on DR Access reports. Tech does produce lots of the same reports, but from a special ed perspective, we really want to encourage you to be using DR Access reports, because we will, as you see in the future slides, be rolling out other reports that are only for special educators, and Tech will also be rolling out reports that are only for general education. And so, so I just want to stress, we encourage you to use DR Access reports to produce the reports. Okay, so what is DR Access reports? So it's an online database open to anyone. Do we have a question? Okay, hold on. We got to get the mic. Well, the folks that are online want to hear your question.
Okay. Hi,
Yes.
everybody. My question, just to clarify, is if, for example, we enter information about DRDP access, special education into Cyrus,
Uh-huh.
do we have to do some kind of special connection with our tech department to have it roll up to another system, or is that automatic?
You mean for state reporting? It's automatic. Your administrator will be processing that part where they take the file and they upload it to the state. But there's a button that's available to you in Cyrus Systems to export your data,
Yeah.
and then you can just pop over to our system and import it.
Okay, thank you.
But you don't have to do anything for state reporting. I'm like 99.9% sure. Oh, I always say ask your administrator for sure, but. Okay, so our online system is open to everyone. It's a free system. You don't have to have an administrator's permission to get an account. So if you're just thinking about it, I do encourage you to go to draccessreports.org and get an account, because just as Tamara was mentioning training that's available for DRDP Tech, we offer the same training for DR Access Reports, and we have 2 coming up in November, 2 webinars where you can come and hear even more than what we can possibly go over today. So once you sign up for an account, then you're on our list, and you'll get all the emails, come to a webinar type of thing. You can use our system to manage your data. Some SELPAs do. And you can also bring your data from other systems to produce reports. And then you can also use our system to export your data for state reporting. That's more of an administrator function. So the reports that we currently have available, these should look just like the ones that Tamara showed in tech. So that's the point. We have the child report, and we have the child progress report. And so our progress report, and I don't know if this is true of your progress report, but our progress report can go for any number of assessment periods. I don't know if yours is just within 1 year. Maybe. Anyhow, these are the reports we have available. I'm going to we're going to go through those in real detail in just a minute. And then we have the child report guidance for special education providers is in your packet. And as I actually do train on the child report in a minute, it's going to be maybe helpful to have that, because there's a much larger sample version of the report, and you won't kill your eyes trying to look at this. And for our virtual viewers, you will also have that in the handouts for this session. I will also be training on the group report, and there's also the group report guidance in your portfolio as well. But we have several guidance documents available at draccessreports.org. So we have the guidance for teachers, right? But we have also released child report family guidance. So there's 2 versions of every report, right? Because we use on the special education side 2 versions of the instrument, the infant toddler instrument and the preschool fundamental view. So when you produce a report, you might get it for an infant toddler, you might get it for a preschooler. But we wanted you to have family guidance that you can use when sharing those reports with families. We have also had those translated into Spanish. So if you're going to use the child report, we really recommend that you print out that family guidance piece to go with it. It's much more friendly language, and it also has a sample that walks them through on the back side of that guidance. It's just 2 pages. And that's all available on the help screen from draccessreports.org. Reports coming soon. I shall do them in order that they're coming. So hard to see, but we're rolling out very soon the peer reference report. Not a report that's going to come out in DRDP Tech. This is going to be the peer reference report for use with children with IEPs and IFSPs. And so this report allows you to take a look at how an individual child's domain rating compares to same-age peers across each one of the domains. The next report that will be coming out after that is the detailed child report. That's a measure-level report. So you'll have the child's domain score, and then you'll be able to look at how the child did across every single measure. And then finally, after that, we will be releasing the group report, which is already available in Tech. And we're just working on how we're going to create groups on the special education side. And so that'll come out after that. But today, our activity that's coming in a little bit is to really dive into using these reports and how do you talk about them and how do you plan collaboratively using the reports. And so we really want to focus on the child report and the progress report and the group report. Okay, so I'm sorry I can't zoom in on this. So that's why you might want to hold that child report guidance up now. I think it's page 4. There's the sample. So let's walk through what you're actually seeing on this report. So the top right corner, and this is the same in both systems. If you produce these reports, it's going to be exactly the same. You have the child's information, just the basic details about the assessor who completed the assessment, their birth date, and then what assessment period this report is for. I'm going to take the status version first. Okay, so the rainbow band across the top is a reminder of the developmental levels on the instrument. So you're all familiar with the DRDP. All of the developmental levels have these names, like responding earlier, responding later, building middle. This is just a reminder of that. But it's also a color coding, right? So we didn't have to put all those names down here and clutter up the report. So responding earlier is sort of that light orange, light golden color. And that's where the boxes down below correspond to responding earlier. Does that make sense? It's a nice legend at the top to remind you of that. So then you have these rainbow bands by domain on this report. But the rainbow bands all look a little bit different, okay? So we call those rainbow bands domain scales, okay? And a domain scale is a statistically derived graphical depiction of how development is occurring in that domain, okay? And we used a large sample of kiddos that we used for calibrating our instrument to create these domain scales. And so the boxes show you that development does not occur in equal steps. And I think as educators, we know that. You can read a measure and read a step and say, wow, that's a big step for a child to learn. That could take 6 months to master that skill. Whereas others might be smaller steps. And this is actually a graphical depiction of that. Now, the larger boxes indicate that generally the step just after that step generally tends to be a more difficult step, meaning that you can imagine a child might be stuck, if you will, in a certain step for a long time because the next step is a lot harder. So you keep rating them responding earlier because responding later is a big step. And so once they move into it, then they keep moving through. So the larger the step, it's more of an indicator that the next step is more difficult. Each one of these domain scales just gives you that graphical depiction for each domain. And that's important as you interpret the report. So what are the other pieces of information available on this report? So there's a thick blue line for each domain, and that is the child's individual domain rating. So that is their rating for that domain. The thin black line that goes across the blue line is the standard error of that domain rating for that child. The standard error is an indication of how confident we are that we have placed the domain rating in the right place. So for example, on SED, Angeline's standard error is much wider than her standard error on math. It's a general indication of the variability of Angeline's measure ratings in that domain. So you can imagine maybe on SED, her measure ratings bounced around a little. They weren't all consistently one thing. Maybe she was a little higher, a little lower across the measures. Whereas maybe on math, her ratings were more consistent. I think it's important to note that never do we expect to see a child across one developmental level across the entire instrument. And in fact, that's typically a red flag for us of a data quality issue. So if we get an assessment that's all building middles, we think, what happened there? Did somebody just think I'm going to mark building middle across the whole instrument? So those are the pieces that are there. In addition, you'll see the little icon right at the top of the domain rating. That's the link to the foundations, and that takes us back to the graph or the chart that Tamara showed at the beginning. The instrument was developed directly from the foundations, and so that's a reminder of which area it links to. We have each one of the domains. We do have some of them split up, so they're easier to interpret, smaller chunks, like PD health becomes physical development and health, easier for you to plan from that. And then down at the bottom, if the child needed to be assessed on the ELD measures, those are present at the bottom as well. Not much changes when you go to the progress report. It's exactly the same structure, the rainbow bands, but now you have more than one assessment present. The earliest assessment, if you will, is on the bottom, and then the most recent assessment is on the top. So whether you have 2 or 4, it's always going to go that way. Okay? So let's talk about how you would interpret this report, how you would use this report. So I'm going to start with the status version of the report. There's 2 important things to look at. I think as a first blush, as a first look at the report, you're looking for areas of strength, let's say. Let's do that first. You're looking for domain ratings that are further to the right, right? So that's good. You can kind of identify some of the domain ratings that are further to the right. However, because the developmental levels aren't necessarily placed in the same developmental space from domain to domain, it's also important to look at where that domain rating is within the developmental levels. For example, you can see that, I'm trying to show you a good example. Both of these on PD Health, she is in exploring middle. But she's clearly, so exploring middle, developmentally, she's right around the same space. She's in the middle on both of those. However, this domain rating is further to the right, and so you would think maybe she's doing better there, but really developmentally, she's in right around the same space on both of those, even though this domain rating is further to the right. It's important to look at both pieces of information. So we could go through this. I would identify math as a potential strength for her, ELD as a strength for her as well. And then the same rules apply as you're looking for potential areas for additional support. You would look what's furthest to the left and in what developmental levels are we looking at. So I would identify SED as a potential area to focus, and also it's in one of the lower developmental levels for her down in responding later. Now, on the progress report, you're looking at those same things, strengths and potential areas of growth, but now you're looking at progress. So you're also wanting to take a look at where has she made the most progress. Well, I can see right here, this is a much larger jump than this. So, however, this is still an area of strength comparatively to SED. However, she made a ton of progress in SED in that 6-month time period. So there's several levels of information you need to take from both of these reports. Are there questions on the child report before I talk about the group report? I'm parched.
Oh, sorry.
No. Okay, so let's talk about the group report. So, looks exactly the same in essence. The backdrop is just the same as the child report, which is great because there's nothing new on the backdrop for you to understand that's different. We have the same rainbow band at the top, and then we have a rainbow band on each one of the domains. But what's different is the information that's overlaid, okay? So instead of this line being the individual child's domain rating, it is the group's average domain rating. So whatever group you have selected, I believe you have a ton of options in tech, like my whole class, my 3-year-olds, my 4-year-olds, whatever it might be, this is the average rating for that group. We do not produce a standard error for groups. Then, which you cannot see on here, but hopefully you can see in the group report guidance document, then within each box, you have a percentage and a count, which associate to the number of kids from your group that are in that level and what percent of your group are in that level. So you can clearly go through and look, an ATL reg, you can, first of all, you can identify as a group what are your strengths, what's going well for this group by looking at what's to the right and what's in the higher developmental levels. So just like you did with the child report, you're going to do for the group. You can also use it to identify areas where you might want to focus a little bit or introduce some new curriculum, whatever it might be, by looking at the items further to the left. You can also use it to take a look at where kids are at relative to one another. Who's down here, who's up here, that sort of thing. But otherwise, it's interpreted in much the same way as the child report. Are there questions on understanding what's displayed here on the group report? Okay, great. So, as we just thought it would be so beneficial, Tamara and I can talk a lot about our suggestions, and we can train on how to use the report, and we can really talk about what we think should happen. But we thought it would be really great to have Kathy Lewis with us today to actually talk about some practical ways that reports are being used, or that she's used reports, and share some ideas around using them. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. Give me 1 second.
All right, so what reports have you used? So since I'm the special ed teacher, I've used the child report and the child progress report. But since I've worked with general educators, they've used their reports. And we use them multiple times throughout the year. But are there different reports that any of you have used? Do any of you work with general ed teachers? Are you inclusive classrooms? Thoughts on that? Okay, so let me switch it. Good. Okay, so I generally will take the lead from my general ed teacher first because their reports are due before the special education reports. So what happens is when I've worked with my general education teacher, I will help her with collecting data and giving her information for her first DRDP, and then she has generated the report, and then we sit down together with the parent at the parent conference, and the teacher goes through the report with the parent. And then I will talk about parts of it, and then we'll compare the IEP goals to what areas the child is working on. And we use that as our beginning of the year planning meeting for the student. So after the general education teacher has shared with the parent and she gives them some ideas to do at home and say, these are some areas that we see the child has a strength, but also areas that maybe we need to focus on this year. And she'll give a list of 3 or 4 activities that we'll do at school, and then she provides a list for the parents. Say, you can also do these at home to support that area of growth. So then that's the first report. And then the second one, it's my turn to do it. So what I've done with my general education teacher is we will carve out an hour, and it takes about an hour to go through the whole DRDP on one child. And we collaborate and go, okay, where do you see them? Where do I see them? We bring the data in from what my paraeducators have shared, and we'll sit for an hour and go through the whole DRDP. And then I'll input it all, and I'll print my reports. And then we would meet again and we would compare them and see, hopefully we've seen progress between the first and mine. In our program, we've ended up doing 5 DRDPs throughout the year. So the general educators will do their 3, I do my 2, but we always work together and compare the information. So it depends on when the child's IEP is, but what I'll use from my report is I'll sit with the parent at the IEP and I'll bring it in and we'll look at some of the areas that the child is working on and what they're improving on and give them some more suggestions to do at home and in the community. I like to use the child progress after a year. We generally print it out and take it to the transition IEP because I like the district to be involved in seeing where the child is. Then what other ones did I use to do? At the annual IEP too. I tended to look at what the child's area of needs are, come up with my IEP goal ideas based on some of the DRDP and some of the foundations, and then just some of the health history on some of the children. Then we take that information from the reports, and the general education teacher has her education plan of what she wants to focus on during the year. And then I'd say, hey, these would be some areas we can build some more intentional teaching to help this child succeed. So there's lots of conversation. Usually twice a year we get a long time to sit down and plan, but the rest of it's in passing or at lunch if there's any common time. Are there other, so who do you share your reports with? I know one, as a special educator, it's with general ed teachers. Do you have any other suggestions? Because I could just keep talking. Go ahead.
We share ours with our district superintendent.
Okay.
Do you have any other thoughts about people you might want to share with? Or you're thinking, oh, we should do that.
Okay. Since I'm in an inclusion program, go ahead.
I'd share it with other people on my team, like the OT or the PT or the speech therapist or whoever else is working
Right.
with the child.
Great. I was going to say that one. You read my mind.
We have coaches in our district, so
Okay.
we share with them as well, so they can look at it more of like all classrooms instead of just one classroom, and kind of they can get more data that way as well, how they
Right.
can support the teachers in the classroom.
Anybody else? I would share with the school psychologist, and I wouldn't share the whole report, but sometimes most of my children rode the bus and some had some communication goals. I would talk to the bus driver, hey, have you heard this child talking much on the bus? And so it depends on the area that they need to focus on and who I would talk to and just get some information from. And let's see if there were any other ones. And my paraeducators, of course, they would need to know. And the teaching assistants in the general education classroom. We don't give them the whole report and have them look at it, but we'd say these are areas that when you're working with the child to focus on. So what happens after that? Maybe I sort of led into it, but after sharing, we review them and we, of course, plan activities to support the child throughout their school day. What other uses do you have for these reports besides planning? Okay, so that's good. Planning's the most important one. And common planning with support staff so that your speech therapist isn't doing something totally different, that they are still focusing on one of the areas from the assessment. We also use them to make any adjustments in the curriculum and in the activities that have been planned. And if we see that something's not successful, we can just on the fly change it and make a different approach to it. Let's see, general ed 3, that. So something else too that I like about the reports is seeing the patterns. It lets you see a pattern in a specific child, but it also lets you see a pattern in the general education curriculum, because maybe there are more social activities and science isn't focused on, or math isn't as much. So it lets us see that, oh, we need to put math somewhere else during the day and build it into the outdoor environment. So these reports are pretty reflective, and they were useful for that as well. Yes?
Might also be a point of reflection for adaptations or other kinds of accommodations that you may have missed before, and if you see there's not progress happening, that you might want to think about looking at your adaptations and making sure everything's in place that needs to be, or
Definitely.
modifying what's in place if it's not working real well.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
All right, there we go. So a lot of the things that Kathy talked about come into play with your curriculum assessment cycle. Here it is that you've pulled these reports. We've given you a really quick 1, 2, 3 of what those reports are and how you read them. And then the next step, whenever you're looking at this cycle, is now that I need to modify my curriculum and my environment based on my data. What is my data telling me about this group of friends that I currently have right now? What am I going to change? What am I going to adapt? What strategies do I need to either beef up or pull back a little bit, just based on what my information is telling me? And then here in the middle of the circle, it gives you those 3 big pieces and how they go hand in hand. Your DRDP, so I pulled the data from this assessment, and then I'm going to go back to my foundations to see what's appropriate at those different age levels, and then I'm going to go to my framework as a map or a guide that says, try these strategies to support learning and development in those specific domains. So as the teacher, of course, there's so many different jobs you have, right? From writing your activity plans, to having to know about all of your children, to observing those children. And then I also need to know how to read these rainbow reports and then use that data in the classroom. That's a lot of different things to be juggling. So it's a big role that you all play. And not only am I planning for individual children, but small and large groups of children. And I can't forget about my children who may have special needs and need a different accommodation or a different adaptation within the classroom. So inside of your folder, you have a report that says Group Report Spring 2016, I believe. Fall 2015, I'm sorry. Looks like this. And it's a landscape. Yeah. So for the next 3-4 minutes, I really want you to talk at your table and analyze this report, taking into account what Elizabeth talked about, what those boxes mean, what the vertical lines mean, what the numbers are telling you about this group of children. So not only did we give you this data about the child, but we also gave you a profile sheet
Of your class.
of that class.
It's the one that says DRDP Preschool Group Data Profile.
Yeah.
And if you want to combine it all, feel free. And if you're virtually participating, you could always chat. Is there a chat box that participants can chat? Okay.
So for the next 3 minutes, we're going to think about developing the right questions when you're looking at this data. We gave you a little profile about who that group is, and you want to think, how would I respond to this data in the classroom? So what is it that stands out to us? What is it that we think we need to be putting some extra effort into? And you're going to share those thoughts and those plans with your partners, just like you would inside of your classroom. So go ahead, take a look at it, analyze it, and think about what kind of questions, how are we going to guide the conversation? We're going to give you 3 to 5 minutes. Go.
test.
Okay, so on the screen is a question. As you analyzed and looked at the data, what questions came up for you? And Elizabeth's going to bring the microphone around. What questions came up as you talked in your group, as you looked at the data?
And virtual participants are welcome to post their questions as well. Any questions? Yeah.
We were wondering what kind of social emotional supports they were using in the classroom, if they had a curriculum or what they were using around that.
So what about the data made you ask that? What stood out?
Well, even though they had a lot of English language learners, their scores were still pretty high in the social emotional area.
So in SED, 25 of the 26 children are, there's an overall rating right there in building earlier. So a large amount, most of all the group is in building earlier. So what kind of curriculum are we using there? Because it seems to be supporting the classroom. That seems to be a strength for the room. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. All right, anyone else? What's something else that stood out? What other questions do you have about the data? I walked around. I heard the questions. There we go. Thank you.
Well, we were wondering why, despite the pretty good language development score, there were lower performing academics, literacy, math, and science. So we were curious about that.
So when I compared the language ratings or the language numbers, it looks like there's a pretty sized group within building early. There's 14 children there. But then when I look over at the other subdomain of literacy, there seems to be a large group in exploring later. So what's going on with the difference between language and literacy? And then leading that kind of conversation with your teachers, with your paraeducators. What kind of strategies are we doing for language that we can also use when we look at math or science or physical development, right? Those other kind of academic skills. So Kathy made a great point earlier. She said when you look at the data, it's going to be very reflective, not just of the children, but also of the teacher. It's telling a lot about you as a teacher, where your strengths are, where it is that you have put in specific kind of strategies, because that data is going to look stronger in those areas. Maybe you read books every single day. Maybe you guys have books throughout the classroom. There's a book time in the morning, there's a book time at the end of the day. We even have a book curriculum where they go home with the parents, and that's all being reflected in your data. Well, those specific strategies, every single day, bringing in families, the beginning of the day, the end of the day, how do I put those strategies into other domains to make those domains strong as well? And there was a hand in the back.
Aha.
So I was looking at that, the SED part 2, and so there's one child who's 2 levels behind, and what supports would need to be put in place to bring that child up to the rest of the class? Or is this a child with an IEP, or is this a child who just started class? Or so how do you sort of figure that out?
So who's that number one? Who's my number one that keeps seeming to be in those earlier levels in the domains?
And I'd add on to that, it might be the child with the quote-unquote challenging behaviors, but it might be a really quiet child, and you weren't aware that you had one child who was really down there until you saw who that was and you figured it out.
So it's a great way to start the conversation when you're looking at these reports and you want to analyze, what does this really mean for my classroom? It might be the child with the IEP. It might be the child who's just not talking to anybody and everyone thinks he doesn't. Go ahead, yes.
It's the building English child. There's one in the English language development who is building English. So is it that child?
So we can't say for sure just based on the numbers, right, whether or not that child is who's also rated at building English and ELD. And actually building English and ELD is a very, I want to say, further along skill, right? By the time children get to building English and ELD, they're having conversations with very minimal use of their home language. So if they are doing that in English, that means that they understand, they comprehend, they're adding detail. They're probably also using that in other domains as well.
So I would just point out, see, there are several children in earlier developmental
Yes.
levels on ELD.
Yes.
So could be.
And there are 7 children, right? Because it's telling you how many children are being rated at those different domains. 7 of them are being rated for that ELD. Oh, that's right. Any other questions came up as you looked at this? So I think the point of the activity is really to come up with reflective planning process. Inside of your folder, you have a yellow handout. I saw some of you find it a little bit earlier that talks about reflective questions for teachers about the planning process. So when we're looking at these reports, when we're working together as a team, when we're talking with families, these are just some guidelines to go over and to support that conversation. So when we look at data, often the question I get is, well, Tamara, when I'm looking at those reports, how do I know which number is my key finding or my trend? How do I know which one it is that I need to provide more support to? And I say you need to ask questions. There's no cookie cutter approach to how you are going to support this data. It's not all of the children at exploring later. It's not all of the children at integrating earlier. And it's not all of the children in the middle. It depends. It depends on several different things. And I've been hearing my voice a lot. So you all tell me, what are some of those things it depends on? You were just talking about it. You were when you looked at the data. One of the things that it might depend on would be the developmental levels of the children.
Yes.
How many of them are dual language learners? How many of them have IEPs? How many of them are 3? Or even in the back, how many of them just started in our classroom, 2 months ago when everybody else has been here for 3 years? All of those things need to come into play when you are thinking about this data, thinking about your classroom, because my room of 4-year-olds and 12 of them have IEPs is going to be different from her room of 3-year-olds and no one has an IEP, right? So what she's attacking is not necessarily what I'm attacking. It's not about the level, it's about who's here. How do I support those friends? So this list here, the yellow handout, gives you a great starting point. And I love the very first question and the very first bullet. The very, very first bullet says, you guys can talk to me, I don't bite. What's the very first bullet? What are your areas of strength? Let's pull from your areas of strength. As a teacher, as a classroom, as a group of children, where are we strong? And then let's look at where we need some support. Think about your small group. Think about what's outside. Think about your teaching strategies, right? Think about adaptations. Think about the accommodations. Are they being followed? All of those things coming into play are going to support you using your data and making it visible in your classroom. Comments? Questions? Yes?
I have a question, because I don't see it reflected here, but what about those children, like you said, that maybe they just started recently, and so you go to, do your DRDP, and you have to mark them as unable to rate. This child is extremely shy, doesn't talk, and or has missed a lot of school. So does that show up on here, or does it?
So first, I'm going to say, being shy is not a reason to select unable to rate. So unable to rate is one of the other options you gave of extended absences. So if the child's not there, then you do unable to rate.
Right.
If I haven't seen this skill, then what I do and what we encourage all teachers to do is go talk to others who know this child. Go get more information. Talk to mommy, talk to the bus driver, talk to whoever else may know some information about that child to help inform your ratings, right? So don't give up just because he doesn't want to talk to you. Because we all know those friends who won't talk to you for 2 months. But mommy says, oh, he's been talking to me, right? I know everything that happens. I know when you go to lunch. I know who his friends are. So use all of the information you have about a child, trying to get as much as you possibly can. Now, some of the measures you might have to select unable to rate because he wasn't there, but you'll still have some information that you can use. So he will show up, maybe just not across all of the domains. And you can use the child report to support him individually, right? Where is he individually? Let's support him.
Right.
And just to add, technically, if there's too many missing ratings, you will not be able to get scores on some of these domains, just as a technical point. You wanted to add something?
I just didn't to remember that any way the child communicates is good for the DRDP. So if a child's nonverbal or uses more than one language or code switches or uses body language or gestures or whatever it is, so you don't have to hear them talk, just know any way they're communicating that you can look for mastery in the ways that they're using that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We love it. Don't be
My
sorry,
other
please.
question is, what about the rating of when they're emerging? So how does that come into play too? If they're emerging to the next level, they're not quite there, but they're like borderline. So you can't really give them credit for moving up to the next level. So you've rated them, let's say, exploring later, but emerging. So how does that show up on the rating?
So emerging has no value in the tech system, no value whatsoever. Emerging is a note for the teacher. It helps you as a teacher. Oh, that's right. He was showing some of those skills of the next developmental level, but it has no value in the system. Do you want to?
Same with us. So emerging is not given any quantitative value and is not taken into account in any way when we calibrated the instrument or in any of these domain scales. It is just a note for you. I would say, you can talk about a child, we don't have a sample up, but say if the sample you're looking in front of you, as they're moving through a developmental colored band and they're getting towards the top, you know that they're moving for that domain. They're getting closer to the next developmental level. It's not a technical, that's not an indication that they're technically emerging, but that is not a word that that you couldn't use when discussing it with a parent, that they're moving towards building middle within this domain. Yeah. Yep.
So that kind of made me think of something else. When I look at this report, all of the rainbows and the beautiful colors and the lollipops are great, but I like to make sure that teachers and everyone leaves with this kind of message because it seemed to just throw off a lot of light bulbs for people. So if I'm looking at this, I want you all to tell me, is there a place where the group is on the cusp of exploring later and building earlier? Where are they on the cusp of one developmental level and not quite at the next, as a group? Just the name of the domain. History, social science. You have the group at the end of exploring later, not quite at building earlier yet. So then I pose this question. As a teacher, where would you plan to meet the needs of the group for that domain? In which level, which kind of skills are you going to be planning for? Is that me? I think it's you with two mics.
I've turned them both off.
Oh.
You're going to look to the next level, so building earlier.
So you say building earlier. Does everyone agree? Yes? Yes. Why? Because it's the next level, and I'm looking to progress, right? That seems like the logical answer. So when I look at science, and it's in the middle of exploring, later, where would I plan for that group? Where would I start to plan my strategies, my ideas, my family engagement? At which level would you be planning? Would you still do it at exploring later, or would you be moving to the next one with building earlier? So here on the science one, it's still in the middle, right? It's still in there. So exploring later is where you're going to put your efforts, because there is still gain to be made in that level for that domain. There is still gain to be made. And sometimes teachers are like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So these reports show you things visually, like she said, that you would not be able to see if you just looked at your regular DRDP. Or if someone just wrote down, my group was at exploring later in the fall, and in the spring, my group is at exploring later. So if they're at the beginning of exploring later in the fall, and then they're at the end of exploring later in the spring, they have made gain. And that's visually able to be seen when you use the reports.
I'm going to add one additional thought to that, and that is, I don't know how many people went to the keynote this morning, and do you remember that he started his story with the cockpit problem for the Air Force pilots, and that they kept designing cockpits for the average person. I think it was mostly the average man at the time, and pilots kept crashing, right? And so the point is, right, that they had to make the cockpits fit people more individually. And so I do agree that the group report is, it tells you what's going on in your classroom generally, right? But in the end, there are always going to be some children that are not at the average point, both above and below. And so individualized instruction, albeit cumbersome and time-consuming, this is one part of a portfolio that you can use in planning for your classroom and in planning for individual children. So it will tell you generally where you're at, but I think in every instance you're going to eventually have to go back to those individual child reports and make adjustments, depending on whether the child is above or below the average. Yep.
All right. Okay. So we're coming to the end. We want to share what resources are out there to help with collaboration and to help with finding more information about DRDP access reports or DRDP Tech reports. So there are, of course, the foundations, which we talked about. CPEN, California Preschool Instructional Network, provides training for foundations and framework. There's also CECO, California Early Childhood Online. California Early Childhood Online. Anybody know about what CECO is? No? Really? So, what is it? Yes, CECO is, it's great, yes. CECO is free professional, you gotta throw in that 4-letter word. Free professional development. Anyone can take modules online about foundations, framework, and or DRDP, and you get professional growth hours for it. So it's a great resource to share with any of the teachers out there that want to know more about foundations and framework and be able to use that in their work. CECO, California Early Childhood Online, and that it also provides training on the framework. So remember, for your foundations, there's a companion framework guide that will give you specific strategies that support that domain of learning. The preschool program guidelines is also a great resource that just helps to build the program from the bottom up, talking about the role of the teacher, why is data important, how do we support dual language learners, and again, all of these, foundations, framework, preschool program guideline, free. You can download them for free from the CDE website. Different training opportunities that are provided, CECO online modules, interactive modules that are online on the DR Access website, face-to-face trainings, both DR Desired Results and DR Access, live web conferences, both DR Access and Desired Results, certified trainer institutes, and a Train the Trainer Institute. So if you're looking to build capacity in your program, certified trainer or Train the Trainer is one of those programs that you might want to look into. And then to get more help, the desiredresults.us website or the draccess.org website.
And probably this is true for both of us. Any of those things that Tamara just went over, the resources, a lot of the guidance documents that we talked about today, our online training and all of those different pieces. If you go to those, our websites, Gen Ed would be the desiredresults.us site, Special Ed, draccess.org. You can access all of those things, register for training, and get what you need. There is also, and I'm sure that's true of your website, a link to our report systems. So you really only have to remember one web address.
All right. So here on the Desire Results website underneath resources, there's a app, the DRDP Portfolio app. We've heard of many programs, especially inclusive programs or gen ed teachers working with special education teachers who use this app as a way to collect documentation and share that documentation about children and then assign it to measures and be able to communicate with each other about, oh, I saw him do this or I saw her do that, and then they can organize it and collect it all within this online system. So if you haven't heard about the app, that is a wonderful resource that's out there, and it's free. So it's a DRDP Portfolio app. Again, if you want to see how I got to it, just go to desiredresults.us, go to Resources, DRDP Portfolio app.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you could also just search for it in App Store.
So not the App Store, it's a web page.
A web page.
No longer one of those cute little apps that shows up on your screen.
Got it.
You can get to it with anything that has internet access. Your tablet, your phone, your computer, your laptop, your desktop, anything with internet access, you just go to drdpapp.org. And you can upload photos, pictures, video, you can assign it to measures, you can assign it to multiple children as well. And then on the Access Project website is where you'll get tons of great information for teachers and service providers as well, interactive tutorials, and all kinds of documentation.
Are there any last minute questions?
Okay, one last, oh yes.
For special education, that'll be
Yes.
coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. Okay. But just a reminder, it's only for special
Only for
education.
special
Only on draccessreports.org.
Okay, it says find 2 people, but we have a very cozy group. So find one person and tell them your aha moment from today's session. Just share one of your ahas. What is something you're taking away, walking off with? Share it really quickly. Thank you.
Do you want to tell me?
Uh-oh. All right. Anyone want to share? What's your aha walking out of here? Or how about we have everyone share, because there's only 6 of you. How about over here?
Definitely looking at the reports and kind of making sense of them, because I hadn't done that before, really looked at them. They're very pretty, and I think you get distracted.
Yes.
But actually digging into the data, I think that's the most valuable piece I'm taking.
Thank you. And here?
I think the same thing, but having a better understanding of when planning, that it can still be within the same, category of exploring later if they're down low, that I don't have to project to the next one, that I can just shoot for moving to the end.
Thinking about if there's gain to be
Yes.
made.
I feel like the yellow sheet that we got is going to help me guide the teachers in coming up with their own data ahas instead of me telling them what to work on.
Absolutely. That's amazing on Halloween. I like it.
Just all the available services and that it's free.
Free. We love that four-letter word. It's awesome.
Just extreme frustration because my team has not been able to figure this out. So I'm going to stay for a few minutes and hope to get some help.
All right.
Yeah.
I loved your recommendation to blow up the domains and post that around the classroom because the children have visuals. I think some of the teachers would really benefit from those visuals.
I agree.
Great.
Great. Great. Well, we want to say thank you so much for being an awesome audience and being here and joining us this day, giving us your time and your effort and energy, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, ladies.